The GBW's glory days dawned deep in the Depression, and it all started with a chance encounter in a restaurant. Homer Edgar McGee was born in Texas in 1885. He hired out on the Missouri-Kansas-Texas Railroad at a young age and rose through the ranks to executive vice president. He was laid off during the Depression and found work on another railroad project. But a lunch with a friend in New York changed his career and the GBW.
A friend of my dad's friend passed the table, and his name was Charlie Cox, and he was chairman of the board of the Green Bay and Western Railroad. So he was stopped, and he sat down for a visit and introduced to my father. And my father's friend said, "Well, Charlie, what are you up to?" He said, "Well, we've got problems on the Green Bay and Western Railroad. I'm trying to find somebody to take over the management." So my friend said to Charlie, he says, "Well, I believe I got your man right here." So they went back to Charlie Cox's office that afternoon and agreed on the takeover.
So that's how he got
the job. So that was happenstance, if there ever was one.
Frank Seymour managed to keep the GBW solvent through the darkest days of the Depression. No small feat, but it was tough, and the railroad was just about used up.
Well, it was in horrible shape. Trains were all run very slow, and there was nothing modern. There were no good locomotives. About a month after my father took over, he wrote me a very short letter, as all of them were, and he said, "I'll let you know where we go from here," because he was very discouraged. And I came up for a visit at Christmas time, and at that time he had seen some light, and he thought there were some real possibilities. He realized that the revenues of the railroad were sufficient to have big expenditures for rehabilitation. So he started the program right away.
The elder McGee was reluctant to borrow money, so he used earnings from the railroad's growing traffic base to rebuild the track. They added tie plates and spread thousands of tons of ballast across the state. The track work program would continue for decades as the railroad transformed itself from a bumpy backwoods pike into a heavier, faster, more efficient carrier.
I don't think you ever get to that point where you're satisfied. You, as I say, you keep raising your standards all the time. By the time the war was over, it took several years. We had a pretty respectable railroad, and then we kept improvement programs all the time after that.
As the track became respectable, Homer McGee contemplated some respectable motive power, the famous 400 class Mikados.
They were wonderful locomotives. They were designed by a man named Kirkby, who came from the Katy Railroad. He was the chief mechanical officer, and with the Alco people, he designed those locomotives. And they were fast locomotives and handled good tonnage.
Were they ever overburdened?
Oh, we overburdened all of our locomotives.
Alco built 3 D-48 class engines in February 1937, GBW 401 and 402, and KGB&W 403. 3 D-47 class engines arrived in October 1939, GBW 404 through 406. Between the two orders, another Alco would alter the railroad's destiny, Diesel-Electric 101. The elder McGee's rebuilding program helped the railroad cope with the traffic boom of World War II.
Well, we handled all sorts of war materials. A lot of them were never identified. They were just billed as, I forget what they called it. And we handled a lot of trucks and automobile type equipment that was going to the war effort, and just general commodities of all kinds.
which included German prisoners of war. The railroad brought over 2,000 POWs from the Africa Corps to Sturgeon Bay, where they harvested Door County fruit.
Well, I remember I was on both of the trains as train master, and when the first one came, we had all these instructions from the War Department about what to do and not to do. And I read that and memorized it because I was very impressed with how correct I had to be. Well, I realized you didn't have to be all that correct, that the lieutenant in charge of the movement didn't hold to any great standards, and so we just hauled the train, and the nice young German boys, they were happy to sit there and eat peanuts and read the Milwaukee Sentinel. They weren't going anywhere.
Passenger trains never found a home on the grab baggage and walk. Population was sparse across the GBW's territory. The Varnish enjoyed a bright but brief dominion in the early 20th century. In 1915, the GBW carried over 800 passengers a day, but the average trip was only 22 miles. In the 20s and 30s, people eagerly abandoned the 25-mile-per-hour Varnish for their Fords, Plymouths, and Chevys. Branch line passenger service ended in the late 1930s, and the mainline passenger trains were downgraded to mixed trains, driving away even more customers.
Did they ever make money hauling passengers?
No, I'm sure they never did.
Was it difficult for the GBW to get permission to abandon passenger service?
It certainly was. We applied several times, I think from about 1935 until we finally succeeded in, I think, 49 to actually discontinue passenger service.
Ridership plummeted after the war, and GBW passenger service ended on April 14, 1949. In that year, the railroad carried 213 riders, an average of 2 passengers a day. After that, passenger trains were few and far between. Until 1961, the railroad ran an annual Miller's Special for Minneapolis Wheat Kings and other shippers. With an FA-1 and several business cars, these trains originated at the ferry dock in Kewanee and tied up in Winona. In May of 1976, the Burlington Northern was planning to absorb the GBW. So the North Star chapter of the National Railway Historical Society chartered 2 excursions out of Winona. On Saturday, the 29th, RS2s 301 and 303 took a 4-car train to Maryland and back. On Sunday, the 30th, they went to Wisconsin Rapids. These trips were called Farewell to the GBW. That name would be used again. The Annapolis Western hosted a tourist railroad for a few years. Starting in 1976, the Algoma Railroad ran excursions from Algoma to Casco Junction. Their president and general manager was Clint Jones, who operated several railroad endeavors in Wisconsin and Upper Michigan. The Algoma Railroad ran 2 round trips daily during the summer and weekends into October. They used an Alco RSC-2 and an S4 from the Milwaukee Road and a 65-ton GE from Milwaukee Coke and Gas. But GBW management changed with the ITEL sale, and the Algoma Railroad was forced to shut down after the 1979 season. Even a small freight-only railroad needs a proper business car. GBW 600, the Roamer, was built by American Car and Foundry in 1918 for oilman Joshua Cosden. It hosted Edward, Prince of Wales, during his tour of North America in the 1920s. The GBW bought the car in 1944, and both McGees used it on their monthly inspection trips. The GBW sold it in 1972 to Thomas Hill Sr. of Ottawa, Illinois. After he passed, Kevin Johnson bought it in 2006 and started refurbishing it. He sold it to the Aberdeen, Carolina, and Western Railway in 2013. It's now part of their business car fleet in North Carolina. The Romer was replaced in 1973 by a unique car fabricated by Craft Steel of Green Bay. Business car 1776 was built on the frame of a 50-foot Milwaukee Road boxcar. Norwood Shops finished the interior and painted it. The GBW later bought a much classier car, former Union Pacific Dome Lounge Observation 9001. Built by American Car and Foundry in 1955, this car flew across the American West on the UP's famous Cities Streamliners. Passed over by Amtrak, the 9001 was sold to Autotrain in 1973, becoming their 901. But Autotrain failed in 1981, and the GBW bought the 901 at auction later that year. Norwood Shops refurbished the car, reinstalling the rear-end windows that the UP had plated over. The railroad planned to name the car Cross Lake, but before it entered service in 1983, it was christened the Trempealeau River. A Golden Arrow excursion featured the Trempealeau River and 3 other domes on July 13 and 14, 1984. Hauled by classic EMD power, a rarity on the GBW, this train ran from Green Bay to Wisconsin Rapids and back both days. However, most of the Trempealeau River service was in charter business, much of it on the Wisconsin Central. This passenger extra from the Wisconsin and Southern Railroad came to Green Bay on the Fox River Valley Railroad. It got on the GBW at Broadway Tower and ran down to Norwood and around the Y to turn the train. Since 1987, most of the passenger movements on the Green Bay route were WC trains using trackage rights between Green Bay and Black Creek. In the end, it was the Wisconsin Central that welcomed passenger trains to the GBW, but more on that later. The GBW came out of World War II in good shape, thanks to growing business and continued capital improvements. But most of the locomotives were small, old, and tired. The only engines that even approached modern were the 6 Mikados. Except the diesels, of course. The railroad purchased a second diesel just before the war, S1 number 103. The GBW discovered the huge savings that diesels offered. They went on a buying binge between 1947 and 49, ordering 2 more switchers, 5 FA1s, and 4 RS2s. This wiped out steam in a little more than 2 years. As traffic grew, the GBW added more units, paying for them out of earnings. 4 RS3s were delivered in 1951 and 55, and an RS11 was added the following year. Unlike most railroads, the GBW chose to buy locomotives rather than lease them.
Well, it's cheaper to buy than it is to lease, and if you can finance it right, so we were able to. Most of the locomotives we bought, we paid it out of, we actually paid it out of operating cash. We went into debt just a short time on locomotives, trying to rebuild the railroad on operating earnings. We were constantly in a rebuilding situation on the Green Bay and Western. We raised our standards frequently, and when we raised standards, we had to spend a lot of money, such as track standards to increase speeds and things of that kind.